Good afternoon. Thank you for this introduction. When we talk about Syria, unfortunately, it's not such a simple subject. It is really quite complex. I can say that it is true that the opposition has been peaceful, but over time it has become more militarized, and the young people who have taken to the streets want greater freedom of expression. But it is true as well that today fundamentalism has spread, and this has allowed the Assad regime to adopt the current stance that they've adopted, because we shouldn't forget that the first who spoke about extremists was Bashar al-Assad. Unfortunately, today we have this danger before us and could take power. This group that could take power in the future and that could be repressive as well. So we're not just against a dictatorial regime. We are against any totalitarian thought represented by extremists or other such groups. Unfortunately, we hear and see a great deal about countries who don't really believe in this risk and who would play it down. But if we see what is happening in Syria, and if we wish to understand it in greater depth, we have to realize that there is a pro-regime group and there is an anti-regime group. And we realize that both sides are quite rigid. Those who are always losers in this conflict are the civilians, because no one in either side is thinking of civilians. And there has been enormous destruction because of this revolt, but of course because of the bombing by the regime. And there is a great deal of destruction that has taken place, and civilians are the ones who are really losing out. So there is no real victory, and I don't think that there will be a victory. Neither the regime nor the challengers will win, because there were three different kinds of fragmentation. Before we had the free army, today we have militia and rebellions known as Sidris, who collaborate, who work alongside with the Syrian National Coalition. And now we have the jihadists and the Islamists who are gaining ground and who are in the front line. We shouldn't forget that. Syria is divided today. Now, we are fearful of what is to come. There are the number of possible scenarios. We see that Syria today is greatly divided. If we look at the north, we see that this area is divided into two. We have the autonomy of the Kurds, who are fighting the Islamists on the other side. Islamists who have infiltrated into this area and into a number of cities and villages. And we also hear they have been able to implement Sharia in a number of places, whereas before it never was. It is something that is rather foreign to the Syrian people. It is true that Syrian society is rather conservative, but thanks to its history and to its historic memory, its collective memory, based on its 7,000-year-long history before Jesus Christ, Syrians have not adopted the laws of Sharia. There are many minorities, moreover, in the country, making up 35% of the population. Of course, there were Sunnites, and that's not really a homogeneous group. We cannot say that the society in Syria is not homogeneous. There are divisions. In the Sunnite group, there are divisions. In urban centers, people have a different vision of religion than the Sunnites in other areas. There are the Sufis who don't see Islam in the same way as the Islamists or the jihadists. Now we hear talk about moderate Islamists like the Muslim Brotherhood or the Salafists or the jihadists. So you see there are many divisions in that society. And that is why when we wish to defend civil society, we need to adopt the idea of secular society that can be adopted by many minorities for their protection, because it is the only way that they can protect themselves. The Alawi, making up 12% of the population, are not Sunnite because they have their own religion. And they cannot compromise with the Islamists. So what can we do for Syria today? If we look at the map, we see that the coastal area is still being controlled by the regime and supported by the Alawite community out of fear, not out of love, out of fear. There are other minorities, Christians, the Ismailites, Druze, and I'm going to repeat this. This is out of fear. We see the southern area in Syria, and there we realize that there are two areas, the Druze and the Sunnite area, which was the core of the revolt, Dara et Oran. We have remained secular until today. And I think that there we can negotiate with the regime, and I think not only of al-Assad. It's not only, the regime is not only made up of the al-Assad family, because there are groups that in power that don't agree. It's not a family, it's not a clan in power. There are institutions. There's the army. There's the security apparatus covering national security. So when we talk about negotiations today, we have to recognize that we have no choice, no other choice. Those who are in favor of the revolt must recognize that there have been 70,000 victims in Syria, and if the revolt continues, the numbers will skyrocket. There will be more and more destruction. So the military solution is not a genuine solution. There is only one outcome, and that is to adopt a political solution. The international community must commit itself toward the civilian population and begin negotiations and arrive at an international compromise between the major players in the region, Russia and the US. And if we can arrive at this compromise internationally, then we can have a compromise nationally involving all the different groups, and we will be able to include the Alawi in the conflict. I also think that this solution will allow us, although I'm not saying that it will be easy, and that we'll be able to implement this rapidly, but I think we will be able to have a ceasefire and a consensus between those who are in revolt and the regime about a ceasefire. And I think we can see that there will be many members of the regime who will agree to stop weapons building so that we can negotiate with other areas further afield. Well, that's what I wanted to say about the situation today in Syria. Thank you.